Relationships are always worth restoring. Whom do you think of when I say that statement? Relationships are always worth restoring. We talked last week about being healed by other people and then healing them. So we're continuing this theme of relationships. And whenever they are broken or they're cold or there's something wrong, they're still always worth restoring. So the evangelical pastor, Rick Warren, he has 6 biblical steps to reconciliation, and we see 4 of them in today's gospel. Number 1, talk to God before talking to the other person. So before we reach out to someone, you should pray, because your heart will change. And sometimes the other person's heart changes. And sometimes you realize that you're mad at a person because you expect too much of them. And you're expecting them to fulfill something in you that only God can fulfill. So before you reach out to someone, do pray. Pray for that relationship before you meet. Number 2, always take the initiative. So it's interesting that St. Peter betrayed Jesus, but Jesus reaches out to Peter. It says, just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you? Cast the net to the right side of the boat and you will find some." So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." So Jesus, after his resurrection, he often prevented the disciples from recognizing him. Why does he do that? It's so that their hearts gently open, slowly open to recognize him. And the same thing happens whenever we reach out to someone. What do you want to do? You want to do it very slowly, respectfully, okay? So gentle. And why does Jesus help them catch so many fish? What's the point behind that? Because if you know the Bible well, you'll know that 3 years prior to this event, a similar miracle happened. And so what Jesus is doing is he's reminding them of a previous time when he did a miracle for them. So in the same way, whenever we reach out to someone, you might want to go back to that time, when you two were in love or when you two were getting along, and you build off that good point. Number 3, sympathize with their feelings. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Okay, so we've said before that Jesus is very strong with the strong, but with the weak, he's very gentle. So St. Peter probably at this point was feeling very guilty, full of shame. And so Jesus is very gentle with him, because we know that St. Peter cried when he betrayed Jesus, and then he looked at him when Jesus was arrested. So at this point, Jesus is making it very easy. Come and have breakfast. Whenever you're trying to reconcile with someone, sympathize with their feelings. How are they doing? Now, their feelings aren't always right, because feelings aren't always right. So you don't have to agree with them, but you can acknowledge them because feelings are real. So you want to do it in a very peaceful setting. One time I had to make up with a friend of mine, so he and we went for ice cream because ice cream is his favorite. And in case any of you are mad at me, I just want to let you know Subway is my favorite. Thanks. Number 4, confess your part of the conflict. So our faith is one of truth. So you always have to seek the truth no matter what. So because we're all sinners, that's the truth. Even if you're only guilty for 1% of the problem in the relationship, you have to say so. You have to apologize. Number 5, attack the problem, not the person. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." So Jesus is focusing on the problem. What's St. Peter's problem? A lack of love. That's why he failed. That's why he betrayed. So the most important thing that Jesus always looks for from us, how much do we love him? And number 6, cooperate as much as possible. So reconciliation always has a price tag. So it might cost us our pride. It might cost us our self-centeredness. Jesus has no pride, and he still lowers himself to St. Peter's level. We said 3 years ago that the text we just showed you has 2 words for love that are really important. It's kind of sad that it's not expressed in the English translation. So let's see what Jesus actually says. He actually says, Simon, son of John, do you agapas me? Agape is the language, do you love me sacrificially? A specific word for love. Do you love me even when you get nothing in return? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I philo you. I love you only as a friend. I don't love you perfectly. I just betrayed you. A second time, Jesus says, Simon, son of John, do you agapas me? Do you love me sacrificially? And Peter responds, yes, Lord, you know that I love you only as a friend. That's all I have right now. I can't do better. And then the third time, Simon, son of John, do you phileus me? Do you love me as a friend? And so here, Jesus is lowering himself to the level of Peter. He understands that's all he's got. And Peter responds, Lord, you know everything. You know that I only love you as a friend. That's the best I can do right now. So sometimes when you've got someone you're not doing well with, you have to lower your standards to their level, but then you have to eventually bring them up to perfection. Because right after this dialogue, Jesus says to Peter, very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. So Jesus lowers himself to Peter's level, then he's going to bring Peter up because we know at the end of Peter's life, he did die for Jesus and he was crucified. And we know from tradition that when they were crucifying Peter, he has to be crucified upside down because he felt he wasn't worthy to be crucified like his best friend, Jesus. So I'd like to show you now a 3-minute video from Alpha about how God leads us to reconcile with other people.
And then when I became a Christian, I wanted a relationship with my dad. I wanted him back in my life. I had to track him down, which I did, and he was living in a pensioner's flat in Macclesfield on his own. You know, I thought he'd have changed like I did. He hadn't. He was grumpier, he was older, he was drinking more, he was just vulgar, crude, sarcastic. And it's exactly what I remembered. And I invited him down to our house, to our home in London. And he'd get the train down and I'd meet him at Euston Station. And every time I'd meet him on the platform, I'd go and get him when he was coming off. He'd be whinging and moaning and complaining and slightly drunk. And one of the things he used to whinge about all the time was money. And then one day he came to stay and he got quite poorly and I had to go to the local hospital. Ended up staying for a week. It was a nightmare. And I wanted to get him back home when he was better. So we took him to Euston Station and I put him on the train and sat him down. And right in the middle of the carriage, I had this overwhelming feeling of love for my dad. And it was really weird. And I almost started to cry in the carriage. And I looked at him and I felt really sad for him. That we'd never had a relationship. I don't ever remember eating a meal with my father. All that stuff came up for me. And in my mind came this idea to upgrade his ticket to a first-class ticket to Manchester. And I bought a very expensive single first-class ticket back to Manchester. And I walked him into the first-class compartment. And I sat him down and I kissed him on the head. And as we stood on the platform, Amanda said to me, "What on earth are you doing?" I said, "You know what? I have no idea. I just really wanted to see my dad happy." And as I looked at him through the window of the carriage, I saw my father take his trilby off. He always wore a hat. Take his trilby off and put it on the table. He hit the recline button and sort of leant back in the leather seat. And then he clicked his fingers and some of the waiters brought him a cup of tea and some biscuits. And then he got his newspaper out and started to read it. And as he was doing that, he just turned to look at me out of the window. And he had the biggest smile on his face that you could ever see. It's like every birthday and every Christmas had all come together. And he was beaming. And that was the last time that I ever saw my father. 3 weeks later, he died of a massive heart attack on his own in that pensioner's flat. Now, I always think, was that me just making up an idea that I thought I might buy him a ticket? Or was that God guiding me? I have a real peace with my father through all those years of arguments and fighting and drinking and womanizing and just awful stuff. The only image I've got of my father is that picture of his face looking through that railway carriage as it drove off.
So we want to listen to the Holy Spirit speaking because he's leading us to reconcile with other people. And, there's certain people that we'll never be able to reconcile without Jesus' help. It is impossible. So just face it. We need Jesus' help. And so one thing we want to do is, there are people in our lives we love that could use Jesus' help, and we want to reach out to them. So every time we launch Alpha, we're thinking, who are the people we love that could use Jesus in their life so that they can be reconciled, first of all, with him, but then with other people. So every December, we've got our 1102 prayer cards. And so we're going to do it now every Easter. So for those of you at the ends of the pews, thank you, Michael, could you start passing them down? If you're at an end of the pew, could you pass the red 1102 prayer cards down? And if everyone just grabs one, and look at it, please. And what you do on these cards are, you write down the names of people you're going to pray for every day at 11:02 a.m. or p.m. And so what you do is you take half of the card, you take the small one home, and the big half, you put it in the basket right in front of here. So when you come up today for Holy Communion, put the big half of the card with those names on it into that basket, and we'll put the basket underneath the altar. Usually when we, write down those names, we always think of the names we want to pray for. But a month ago, we had the head of Alpha Canada come to our parish, and she said, ask the Holy Spirit whom he wants you to pray for. Don't just write down the names you want. Ask the Holy Spirit, who does he want you to pray for? So we've got the rest of Mass to think about this. You've got the cards, if you've got pens, write it down in peace. So that beautiful video we saw of Paul Cowley with his father, the joy he had before he died, that is what Jesus wants for all of us. So relationships are always worth restoring.